I'm going to be using this clip to more or less guide you through the variations that we will be looking at in this DVD. We're primarily going to be concerning ourselves with Poulsen variations, but in some cases we will be tapping into some other Sicilians. For example, against the bishop e2 variations, I will be recommending the Scheveningen variation, and in some cases we will be covering variations that are not quite a Poulsen. But let me get into what I'm talking about. Of course, the Sicilian Poulsen starts after e4, c5, knight f3, but actually here we have a little bit of deviation. We can get to the Poulsen Sicilian in two ways. One is to play knight c6, d4, takes, knight takes d4, and then play e6, which of course reaches the Poulsen position that we want to. But it's also important to know that the more common move order, and the one that I'm going to be advocating, is that you go through e6. And the reason that I want you to be, or most amateurs I believe should be playing e6, is that you're avoiding one of the main variations of the Rossolimo, which is knight c6, bishop b5. This is a very common response used by players that want to avoid this Sveshnikov variation after d4, pawn takes, knight f6, knight c3, and e5. Now, a lot of white players, for one reason or another, do not like playing this variation with white, so they play this move bishop b5. And the thing is that if you want to play the Poulsen with this move order, you're going to have to deal with this move bishop b5. Now, if for some reason you're a Sveshnikov player, switching out of it, or if you feel very comfortable in the Rossolimo, then by all means use this move order. But more commonly than not, Poulsen players play e6 because they just avoid the Rossolimo completely. Now, nothing in chess is free, so when you give up one square, you gain another. When you gain one square, you give up one. In this case, after e6, white will have a couple of choices on how to avoid the Poulsen from the get-go. Now, the most common situation right now is a variation that's been gaining momentum in the last couple of years, and it's this nifty move g3. This kind of fianchetto setup designed to not allow the Poulsen setups to happen too early. But we will be discussing this in great detail with actually 3 games from the recent World Cup in Tromsø in Norway. But it seems like black is just completely fine in this position. It seems like white is just using it more of as a surprise weapon than anything else, and if we know what we're doing, we will be just fine. So what else is there? e6. There are some variations such as b3, c3, d3. Sometimes they play knight c3 without any intention of playing d4, but I'm not going to be covering any of these anti-Sicilians to any real degree. We're going to be focusing instead of d4, of course the main line of the Sicilian, pawn takes, and after knight c6, again we have a lot of branching variations. Definitely the best move and the most common move in this position is knight c3, so we will be focusing on this move with the knight. But as alternatives, I'll be giving 2 important moves. c4, which I believe is quite dubious in this position, but it's important that you know what to do against it. White is trying to obtain some kind of Maroczy setup with this pawn on e4 and c4, trying to bind black. And although this might work against the Con Sicilian being the position with here a6 instead of knight c6, although white can play this Maroczy kind of setup against a6, against knight c6 it's not so good, and we're going to figure out why and how to punish the c4 move. Instead, if white wants to play this hedgehog setups, they should play this knight b5 move, forcing black to defend this square with d6, and only then play c4. But the loss of tempo and actually the awkward positioning of the knight on b5 will allow us to obtain quite good counterplay, effective counterplay with absolutely no problems, and we'll see 1 or 2 examples on this variation. So going back, we're going to be focusing most of the DVD on the main line, knight c3 of course, and I'm going to be recommending the queen c7 move order, against which we will be facing many different tries by white. Some are more positional, some are more quiet, and some are just very, very aggressive. So of course we have to see some dubious little tries like g3, which was tried a couple of times this year, which is trying to steer the game into kind of a Scheveningen G3 variation, which is honestly quite fine for black, and I'm going to be giving two perfectly good solutions against this G3 setup. F4 directly is also worthy of noticing because it's a very aggressive move, but again, we will be having no problems against such aggression without the knight on F6. The move F4 I don't believe makes that much sense. And the two main moves of this position, which of course are bishop e3 and bishop e2. Starting with bishop e3, after a6, queen d2, knight f6, long castle. I'm going to be recommending the variations with bishop b4. And of course I am going to go into great detail on exactly what you have to do on every single one of these sharp ideas that white has, and exactly how to obtain good counterplay as black. I believe that black's position is quite satisfactory. Black's been playing this quite recently in very important tournaments with quite good results, so I am definitely positive that this variation is of no concern to us. On the variations that include the move bishop e2, either before or after bishop e3, I will be recommending to use a Scheveningen setup. After bishop e2, a6, bishop e3, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, f4, d6. We'll be taking a look at white's main ideas. The first and most common idea, of course, is the line with a4, either immediately or after king h1, castles, and then king h1. And white's idea in this position is to follow up with bishop f3, sometimes g4, g5, and initiate a slow but powerful attack on the king side. We're not going to be dealing with any of these nonsense in this DVD. We're going to be using a new try championed by players such as Morozevich and Nagy, who have proven in recent games that the move knight takes d4 is not only worthy of attention, but it's likely to become the main line in the next few years. So this is not only a theoretically relevant DVD, this is the most important variation, and it's brand new, and I'm going to be taking a very deep look into these positions, trying to figure out how white is trying to obtain any kind of advantage and how exactly black is able to reply to any of white's ideas and obtain a fantastic position. Black has scored incredibly well in the last year and a half in this position, and I believe that we will be seeing many more of this variation, much more of this variation in the coming years. And of course this DVD would not be complete if I were to recommend the Scheveningen setup without looking at the queen e1 variation, in which white tries to assault the king side almost immediately. And we're going to be seeing many different ideas on how to resolve black's problems. Especially I like the ideas that Grischuk and Yakovenko have been coming up in recent years, and especially in the last month and a half from the recording of this DVD. But I will also be giving some ideas that Movsesian has that radically change the nature of the position, including ideas such as castles, queen g3, and of course I'm going to be looking at the main line with knight takes d4 in the games that I mentioned previously, but also this idea of playing a quick d5 that Movsesian used against Kamsky very recently and obtained very easy equality. This will probably be covering most of the DVD. Maybe there's a couple of variations, minor variations that I'll be looking at, and of course I'll be focusing on the move orders that are very important for this defense on their relative terms. But overall, I have been very happy with the results that Paulsen has been having recently, and I believe that no matter what variation white tries against you, you will be obtaining a perfectly good game.